Thanks, Blaine. Starting with men's soccer, the Choctaws defeated Delta State 2-1 at home last week. Victor Bazin and Dominic Snee scored goals for MC. The women's team traveled to Spring Hill where they defeated the Badgers 4-0. Peace Gill, Emily McNair, Samantha Carson, and Emma Claire Furman scored goals for the Choctaws. Both teams have only 2 regular season games left before they compete in the GSC Conference Tournament. The Choctaw volleyball team competed in the South Region Crossover Tournament where they went 1-2 for the weekend. The Choctaws defeated Nova Southeastern but fell to Flagler and Embry-Riddle University. They also competed against Christian Brothers at home this week where they fell 3-0. Their season record moves to 10-14. In cross country, the men and women's team competed in the Mississippi College Invitational last weekend. The men's team placed 5th, led by Alec Beers, and the women finished in 3rd, led by Rachel Smith and Hannah Chamberlain. Both teams will compete next weekend in the GSC Conference Championships. And the Choctaw football team traveled on their longest trip of the season where they faced Valdosta State in Georgia. After a tough game, the Choctaws were defeated 55-3. And this weekend, the Choctaws are looking for their first win of the season on homecoming day as they face West Georgia. Thanks, Blaine. The men's soccer team played 2 games this past weekend, and the first game was at home where the Choctaws tied Alabama Huntsville to a 1-1 draw. Then they traveled to West Alabama where they faced the Tigers and lost 2-1. Senior Jacob Farthing scored the only goal for the Choctaws. They'll play at home this Sunday against rival Delta State. The women's soccer team played 2 games on the road last weekend. The team traveled to West Georgia where they defeated the Wolves 1-0. Junior Lauren Smith made the goal for the Choctaws. Then they traveled to North Alabama where freshman Emily McNair scored the Choctaws' only goal. But they were outscored by the Lions 3-1. They'll travel to Spring Hill this Sunday. And last weekend, the Lady Choctaw volleyball team played 2 matches at home against West Georgia and Montevallo. In the first match of the weekend, the Choctaws dropped all 3 sets against the Wolves, but brought home a win on Saturday against the University of Montevallo. They won 3-1. The Lady Choctaws will travel to Hoover, Alabama this weekend where they'll compete in the South Region Crossover Tournament. In Choctaw football, the team traveled to Pensacola, Florida on Friday to play an early game against West Florida. Tiberius Lampkin put the Choctaws on the board with a touchdown run early in the first quarter. And then later in the game, Aaron Feazell threw a touchdown pass to put the Choctaws in the lead going into halftime. In the second half, MC played with a strong defense, but a fourth quarter turnover led to another loss by the Choctaws. The final score was 28-14. The team will travel this weekend on their longest trip of the season where they'll face Valdosta State in Georgia. Back to you, Blaine. Thanks, Jez. The Lady Choctaws finished their soccer season last week as they fell to West Florida 1-0 in the second round of the conference tournament. They finished with a final record of 15-4-1. The Choctaw volleyball team finished their season as well with a 3-0 loss against North Alabama. They finished their season with a 10-22 record. And the Choctaw football team traveled for their last game of the season this past weekend where they were defeated by North Alabama 16-7. They finished their record with 1-9. But even though most of our fall sports teams have ended their seasons this semester, we can look forward to men and women's basketball, who will play their first home games this weekend. The Lady Choctaws face Lemoyne-Owen College, followed by the men who will take on William Carey University. Thanks, Jen. Starting with men's soccer, the Choctaws claimed a spot in the postseason this past weekend with a double overtime game that ended in a 1-1 tie against Montevallo. Then the team celebrated another win on Senior Day against Auburn Montgomery. With a season-high score, 6 different Choctaw players scored goals for MC. The final score was 6-0. The Choctaws will play next week in a GSC conference tournament. The women's soccer team also scored a Senior Day win against Auburn Montgomery. Holly Pasco, Samantha Carson, and Katie Taylor helped score goals in the second half to seal a 3-2 win for the Lady Choctaws. They also finished off their regular season with a 4-0 win against Delta State this week. The Lady Choctaws will open up the GSC Conference Tournament at home next week. The MC volleyball team has had a tough stretch over the past couple weeks, dropping their last 3 games against Christian Brothers, West Florida, and Valdosta State. But they're looking back They're looking to get back on track, and the Choctaws will face North Alabama later this week and the University of Alabama Huntsville on Saturday for Senior Day. And in football, the Choctaws had a wet ending to their homecoming game. The defense came out with a strong first quarter effort, forcing 3 turnovers in the first quarter. MC held West Georgia scoreless in the first 23 minutes of the game, but couldn't get any points on the board for themselves. And due to the weather, the game was suspended late in the third quarter and was called before the teams could finish in the fourth. The final score was 28-0. The Choctaws have an off weekend this week, but next week they'll take on the field for Senior Day against Shorter University. Back to you, Jen. Thanks, Marquisha. In Choctaw soccer, last week the men's team played 2 games at home where they faced Christian Brothers University and Point University. In the first game of the weekend, the Choctaws beat the Buccaneers 1-0, and senior Jacob Farthing made the game-winning goal in the first 10 minutes of the game. That was his 3rd goal of the season. A couple days later, the Choctaws faced Union University where the Choctaws fell to the Bulldogs 3-0. They will play one more game at home this weekend against Alabama Huntsville and 1 game on the road at West Alabama. This weekend, women's soccer team also played Christian Brothers and Union University, bringing home 2 wins for the Choctaws. Against Christian Brothers, the Lady Choctaws delivered a shutout game, winning 3-0. They also faced Union University, where junior Lauren Smith scored 2 goals, followed by Madison Mosier, Lauren Kate Carter, and Katie Taylor, who all scored a goal for the Choctaws. The final score was 6-1. They'll travel for their next 2 games this weekend, where they'll face West Georgia and North Alabama. This past weekend, the Choctaw football team played an exciting game against longtime rival Delta State, and with the Heritage Bell Trophy on the line, the Choctaw defense opened the game with a strong 3-and-out drive against the Statesman offense. The Choctaws were the first to put points on the board with an MC field goal, and then freshman quarterback Aaron Fiesel made a 65-yard pass to Nathan Faishon, putting the Choctaws in great field position. To finish the drive, Fiesel scored a rushing touchdown to put the Choctaws back in the lead. After an interception by Delta State, the Choctaws were behind 13-10 at the half. In the third quarter, freshman Darius Young ran 56 yards on a kickoff return to put the Choctaws in scoring position once again. Wide receiver Nathan Faishon found the end zone with a touchdown pass to Christian Keene to close the gap to 3 points. After another Choctaw turnover, Delta State drove down the field to score their final touchdown of the game. The final score was 30-17. After a hard-fought game against the number 13 team, Delta State, the Choctaws came up short in the fourth quarter, moving their record to 0-5 of the season. They traveled this weekend to Pensacola, Florida, where they'll face the West Florida Argonauts. Back to you, Marquisha. Thanks, Brian. To round out the fall sports season here at Mississippi College, I went out on campus to test our students' knowledge of MC sports in our last segment of How Well Do You Know MC? The men and women's basketball teams have kicked off their season here at Mississippi College. The men's team have already played 5 games so far this season with a 4-1 record. In a 3-game winning streak to open up the season, the Choctaws defeated the University of Southern New Orleans twice, as well as the William Carey Crusaders. Their first loss of the season came against the UAB Blazers last week. The Choctaws faced their first GSC opponent of the season last night, where they defeated Union University 69-65. They will face Christian Brothers University in another GSC matchup on Saturday. The women's basketball team have also played 5 games this season with a 2-3 record. The Lady Choctaws defeated the University of Southern New Orleans and Lemoyne-Owen College in their first 2 games. But the Choctaws fell in their next 2 against Arkansas Tech and the University of Southern New Orleans. They also faced their first GSC opponent last night, where they fell to Union University 98-71. They will take on Christian Brothers University this Saturday. The men and women's track and field teams will begin their season this weekend in Birmingham, Alabama, where they will compete in the BSC Icebreaker Invitational. Back to you, Brian. Thanks, Lauren. First, we'll take a look at the Choctaw volleyball team, who's had a pretty rough stretch of games over the last few weeks. With only 3 games left in their season this year, the Lady Choctaws are looking for a win this week. Their next game is on the road at West Alabama after they dropped 3-0 against West Georgia this past week. Their season record is 10-19. Both the men and women's soccer teams hosted and competed in the first round of the GSC tournament this past week. The Lady Choctaw soccer team brought home a win for MC over West Alabama. Emma Claire Furman, Caitlin Hayes, Lauren Smith, and Galen Cooper scored goals for the Choctaws to give the team a 5-1 win over the Tigers. They'll travel to Montgomery, Alabama this weekend, where they'll face West Florida in the semifinals. The men's soccer team also defeated West Florida Argonauts 3-2 to bring home another win for the Choctaws this week. They also travel to Montgomery this weekend to face Alabama Huntsville in the semifinals. And the Choctaw football season is coming to a close with only one game left this year, but men and women's basketball is right around the corner. Both teams have begun their practices, and their regular season schedule begins in the next few weeks. Their first home basketball games are slated for November 18th in A.E. Wood Coliseum. Lauren?
Thanks, Marquisha. Choctaw Fall Sports began their seasons this month, and volleyball head coach Julie Reedus has guided her team to a 7-7 record. The Lady Choctaws have played 3 home games so far this season, and 2 of those have been shutouts. But last weekend they fell to the West Alabama Tigers in all 3 sets. Their next home game is October 6th, where they will face the West Georgia Wolves. The women's soccer team has had a great start to their season so far with a 6-1-1 record. They recently won 3 of 4 games on the road, only falling to Lee University. Their next game is at home, where they will face Christian Brothers University. And the men's soccer team is doing just as well with a 7-0-1 record. The Choctaws are on a 6-game winning streak, including their last 4 games on the road. They look to continue that streak at home this weekend when they face GSC opponent Christian Brothers University. And on to football, the Choctaws began their year with 3 games on the road. The Choctaws traveled to Atlanta, Georgia, where they faced the Clark Atlanta Panthers, and junior linebacker Colton McGee made his debut with an interception. And quarterback Ty Jobe scored 3 rushing touchdowns in his first game with the Choctaws. Taking the game into overtime, MC fell to the Panthers 29-32. And then the Choctaws traveled for their next 2 games to Southwest Baptist University and West Alabama. Finally, the Choctaws played their first game at home, where they faced GSC opponent West Florida. Holding the Panthers to 1 touchdown in the first 2 quarters of the game, the Choctaws played a strong first half, but weren't able to put any points on the board. The final score was 35-0. The Choctaw football team has had a rough start to the season, going 0-4 so far, but with a strong effort from the defense, MC looks to improve their record going into the next few weeks. As MC looks for their first win of the season, the Choctaws will play at home this weekend in the Heritage Bowl against longtime rival Delta State. Back to you, Marquisha.